I'm really not sure when I acquired it. I probably got it when Tower was closing and they put everything on closeout. And I just threw anything that looked interesting into my cart. I've been slowly rediscovering West Coast jazz over the last few years, and this is one of the many, many gems from this often overlooked genre. Outside of Dave Brubeck, the West Coast scene was almost entirely absent from Ken Burns' documentary on jazz. It just gets ignored all over the place. And then recently I watched the series Bosch on Prime, and the music of Art Pepper was prominently featured. The main character was a big fan, and it featured in quite a few of the scenes.
This week's recommendation comes from James Wolken. And if you're thinking you've heard that name before, James is responsible for pretty much the entirety of Season 3. With the exception of Camel, all the albums I looked at last season came from the record collection he passed on to us. James suggested Art Pepper plus 11. And man, am I excited for this one. I love West Coast jazz, having spent a good amount of time with the music of Dave Brubeck, Chet Baker, Chico Hamilton, Kyle Chater, Vince Guaraldi, Herb Ellis. Heck, my dad always cited Joe Morello as a primary influence on his drumming. But for whatever reason, I have not heard a lot of Art Pepper. I've heard some Pepper Adams. That's true. And Art Blakey. Yep. And Art Farmer, and Art Tatum, and Art Themin, and Art Jarrett, and Art Rez. Okay, enough with the art history. So far, the only Art Pepper album I know for sure I've heard in its entirety is Straight Life from 1979, mostly because I was trying to learn Nature Boy at the time, and his recording was the first one I came across. Looking at the tracks on Art Pepper plus 11, I see a lot of tunes I already know very well. So let's see, Groovin' High and Shall Nuff are both Dizzy. Opus Defunct is Horace Silver with Art Blakey. Round Midnight is Monk. Walkin' Shoes and Bernie's Tune are Jerry Mulligan. Anthropology and Donna Lee are Charlie Parker, though I think Miles composed Donna Lee. And Arraign is Sonny Rollins, also with Miles. Not sure where Move is from originally, but I first heard it on the Lou Donaldson album Blues Walk. In fact, I think the only song on this album that I don't know at all is Four Brothers by Jimmy Guffrey, however you say his name. But you know, what has me intrigued about the tunes on this album is that they're mostly East Coast bebop tunes, which I would have assumed to be a bit too frenetic for someone of the cooler West Coast persuasion. To unfairly oversimplify the difference, West Coast jazz is kind of like... whereas bebop tends to be more... See what I mean? All right, but enough speculation. The thought of spending a full week with jazz has me anxious to get started. Okay, back in a bit. Meanwhile, here's some information from James about what to listen for.
Art Pepper, obviously. And then the solos of the other musicians were basically the cream of the West Coast crop. You should also listen for the arrangements of Marty Page. Basically, you've listened to his music all of your life. He did the arrangements and the scoring for Lady and the Tramp, the movie. He won an Emmy for the theme to Ironside. Did tons of television work and tons of work with the best bands and vocalists, including his work with Mel Torme with the Marty Page Dectet albums, which are just beyond category. He also did the music score for the film The Fugitive. So you've been listening to his music all of your life. He's also the father of David Page of Toto. And then I suggest you take a wiki search and do it on Art Pepper plus 11. And then just click on each of the musicians who's there and see how extended the bios are on all of these guys. I'm just going to mention three of them: Jack Sheldon, Med Flory, and Mel Lewis. Jack was a contributor to Schoolhouse Rock, Conjunction Junction, and I'm Just a Bill. And he was also on quite a few episodes of Dragnet, always playing one of those nutty, goofy witnesses that were on that show. He was also Merv Griffin's band director and sidekick for years, and appeared in Star Trek The Next Generation as the piano player on the holodeck. And his trumpet playing is even better than his acting. Med Flory was an accomplished actor and pitchman I remember him doing Ford commercials when I was a kid, as well as an arranger and a player. And he was the co-founder and co-arranger for the Grammy Award-winning Super Sax, which played harmonized arrangements of Charlie Parker solos. If you haven't listened to Super Sax, it's an incredible band. The other one I'll mention is to listen to the drum work of Mel Lewis, especially his use of cymbals. His approach to drumming is all his own, and he's basically a supporter, not a driver, not to lead them and push them, but to support them. I've yet to find an album where Mel Lewis is the drummer and isn't top shelf. And basically, listen for, these are bop classics that are arranged for a small band of peerless players.
Yeah, Art Pepper can play. The tracks on this album are slick, they're polished, they're put together. But at no point do I get the impression that Pepper's in any way hindered from expressing himself improvisationally. And Jack Sheldon, holy smokes, is he great. It's hard to believe that the guy who sang this,
I'm just a bill, yes, I'm only a bill,
can play like this. He was also Riker's piano player on the Minuet episode of Star Trek The Next Generation. Honestly, I wish he was featured more on this album. Move brings the tempo down a bit from the Lou Donaldson recording, but adds contrapuntal horn parts. And to continue the comparison, Art Pepper's solo starts off hitting the tonic pretty hard, which is exactly what Lou Donaldson does on his recording. But really, it's Jack Sheldon who impresses me most on this one, even with just 8 bars to play with. Groovin' High doesn't take any of the energy or the swagger away from Dizzy's version, even if the full horns section call and response thing is a bit Doris Day. The full horns playing the first chorus's solo is impressive enough, in the same way that Zappa arranged Jimmy Page's Stairway to Heaven solo for a full horn section. Opus Defunct might actually be a touch faster than Horace Silver's original, though it does lose that behind-the-beat feel that Silver put into his piano intro, which I always thought was the best part of that song. And Round Midnight, it was fine. Okay, look, I know that ballads are harder to play than most people realize, and that improvising over those changes is by no means trivial. But at this point, I've heard so many versions of Round Midnight. This isn't a bad version, I just don't know if I have all that much to say about it. Four Brothers is fun. The harmony style of the horns at the beginning actually reminds me a lot of Oliver Nelson, although the last couple of choruses before the song ends is very late 50s jump jazz. Sure enough. Okay, look, this is a tough tune. Dizzy wasn't screwing around when he wrote this one. They keep Dizzy's breakneck tempo for this one, and Art Pepper's first solo is particularly good, ending with more swagger than I would have expected. Bernie's tune is one of those memorable, repeating, odd little melodies that I tend to gravitate towards when putting a set list together. Kind of in the same category as In Walked Bud by Monk or Jordu by Clifford Brown. And Art Pepper's version is definitely the West Coast version, right? Mid-tempo, lush sax arrangements, strong solo. Walk-in shoes. Compared to the Jerry Mulligan original, they actually brought the tempo up quite a bit. So maybe mall walking shoes? Swings hard though. Nice feel. Okay, and now we got to talk about Anthropology. Gotta say, Art, you done this one dirty. For those of you unfamiliar with Anthropology, Anthropology is top tier Charlie Parker. This is a notoriously difficult song with one of the most challenging melodies of all of Bird's compositions. Here's an early recording led by Charlie Parker and Dizzy Gillespie. But for some reason, Art Pepper thought the way to do this song was to slow it down to mellow swing levels and play it on clarinet. Arraign. I like this arrangement quite a bit. Adding the response to the stops for the head was a nice touch. And finally, Donna Lee. Look, when I was listening to this, my brain was doing funny things. I'm going to have to sit down with an instrument and find out what's going on, because it feels to me as if the key modulates a couple of times during the melody. And I don't mean like the normal 1-6-2-5 modulations that are part of the chord structure. I mean, it sounds to me like they went from the overall key of A flat to B natural or something. Maybe I'm wrong. Or maybe it's just because it's not recorded in the original key. I don't know, but something's going on. Other than that, I think they nail this one. I like it. Overall, this fits, I think, the idea of West Coast cats playing bebop with a small big band. Nice recording, too. Even compared with other recordings from 1959, this one sounds really good. And now I get to listen to Plus 11 for a week. Cool. Meanwhile, James has some more thoughts about this album.
What does this music mean to me? Like I said, I've been listening to West Coast jazz more and more over the past few years. If you listen to a lot of the Blue Note, Colombian, Atlantic, and Impulse stuff from the East Coast, it's utterly fantastic. But at the same time, there's a lot of anger that underlies it. And I find that to be a little bit wearing. It's not always angry, but it's usually not relaxing. As Jack Sheldon put it, we live in Southern California. What's there to be angry about? West Coast guys were just a little more laid back, but no less impressive in their playing. A lot of them apprenticed with Stan Kenton or Woody Herman or any of the other big bands who were on the West Coast. And a lot of them, like I said, finished their careers playing in the Tonight Show band. They played and arranged for studio bands for the movies and television. We have heard them all of our lives. If you grew up when I did in the 60s and 70s, they were the soundtrack to life. Every television show had big band music. Every commercial had big band music. It was all over the place in the background. This music is enjoyable in just about every aspect of that term. At times it's complex and it's still very listenable. Just have a listen and enjoy what they can do. That's basically what it means to me.
You guys, I love jazz. Pretty much all of my favorite albums are jazz albums or have some kind of jazz influence. But I feel it's important to clarify a thing or two about what I mean when I say that. I used to participate in the r/jazz subreddit quite a bit. But I remember one time when someone posted who was new to the genre and they asked for a working definition of what we mean when we say jazz. My answer was, jazz is the thing you know after you've learned enough to disagree with Ken Burns. For a lot of people, including seemingly Ken Burns, jazz seems to mean horn-led music played primarily in swing time. And that's about as far as it goes. That's not how I would define jazz. That's not how I would put it. To me, the defining characteristic is improvisational risk-taking. The one thing that all my favorite music has in common is the sense that as the recording is being made, you're listening to the musicians playing right at the limit of their capability. That at any moment, the wheels could come completely off. That if you were able to hear the internal monologue of the musicians, it would sound something like... That's what I prize most of all in music. One of the things that makes Giant Steps, for example, so thrilling is hearing Tommy Flanagan holding on by his fingernails, followed immediately by Coltrane absolutely destroying. If Coltrane's quartet had rehearsed Giant Steps to within an inch of its life, that moment would never have been recorded. And unfortunately, that tendency towards over-rehearsal is a kind of thing that can happen in big band scenarios. Look, don't get me wrong. I'm not against big bands. I adore the big band recordings of Duke Ellington, Count Basie. Hell, the collaborations between Gil Evans and Miles Davis are just immaculate. I love that stuff. But when you bring bebop to a big band, that's tricky. The real probability that the music will be completely sterilized in the process is pretty high. And the Art Pepper Plus 11 recording has moments like that make you feel that you're hearing a recital rather than a collaborative art-making process. But there are two things that save it for me. First and foremost are the improvisations by both Art Pepper and Jack Sheldon. They both kill on this album, without question. But the other thing is the arrangements. Anthropology aside, the one thing that these arrangements have in common is that Marty Paich makes a concerted effort to make sure that the arranged parts never interfere with the improvisations. Even when they add a sting to a chorus behind the soloist, it's never something that distracts from what's being created. It's even something that's called out in the liner notes of the album. I wanted to give him, Paich notes, a different kind of inspiration than he's been used to with just a quartet behind him. I wanted Art to feel the impact of the band, and I thought this setting would spur him to play differently than usual, though still freely within his natural style. Precisely. So for that reason, I dig this album. It could have gone very wrong, but it didn't. Final thoughts, scale of 1 to 10. I give Art Pepper Plus 11 one Criteria Edition DVD copy of This Is Spinal Tap.
These go to 11.
See you next week.